So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special evening. My name is Shirley Kramer, and I am the chairman of British Future. So I really want to welcome you all to our event, to thank you for coming, and to say a very special thank you to my fellow trustee, Shailesh Solanki, and the Asian Media Group for supporting us in this event and partnering with us to make this happen. A few housekeeping rules. We're going to be live streaming this event, so it would be awful if somebody's phone went off. So if you could have your phone on silent, that'd be great. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if it does go off, try not to all aim for the door at once. We'll be going through the marble hall and outside the fire exit if the fire alarm does go off. We would encourage you to tweet tonight. It is okay to tweet, and we think that would be probably very interesting for outside audiences. Tonight's agenda is we're going to have our conversation between Sunder Katwala, the Chief Executive of British Future, and the Home Secretary. And that will take place for around 45 minutes. We'll then have 30 minutes for questions, and I'm sure many of you have, there'll be a pent-up demand for questions. And afterwards, we'd be delighted if you could all join us for a reception. So perhaps we could now welcome our in-conversation partners for this evening. A couple of words of introduction about British Future, which some of you will know and some may not, but our vision is that Britain should be a confident, welcoming and inclusive country. And we feel there is a little way to go at the moment with that. And so one of our big focuses, of course, are on the issues that have been polarizing and divisive. Some of those issues that you know we focus on: identity, immigration, integration, and opportunity. And it's our goal at British Future to find common ground, to spend time talking to people, a wide range of people, to really find out what they think. So our national conversation, which took place across 70 cities and towns in the UK, the National Conversation on Immigration, in partnership with the Home Affairs Select Committee, has provided lots of new information about what people actually think. And I would recommend it to you. It's a very good read, and it's outside in the foyer there. British Future is independent, a non-partisan think tank. It isn't our role to take sides in elections, whether that's between parties or within parties. We recognise, though, that the big moments of political change are really important in shaping agendas and new agendas. And so at these pivotal times, I think it's a challenge for civic society voices like British Future to play our role in promoting these public conversations. And that's exactly what we're doing tonight. We're really delighted that the Home Secretary, the first British Asian to hold one of the great offices of state, is here tonight in conversation with our own Sunder Katwala. And as you know, tomorrow is Friday, and therefore it's June the 7th when the Prime Minister will effectively stand down, and the Home Secretary, as we know, is a candidate to be the next Prime Minister of this country. So this is a unique opportunity to hear his views, and so I'd like to hand over to Sunder for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley, and welcome, Sajid, to this conversation. Thank you for taking part of it. We're hoping to talk tonight about the state of the nation, the challenges we face, the identity issues that we're very interested in. But we're all the product, as we debate those identity issues, of our own experiences, lives, our experiences of this country, and so on. So that's where I'd like to start, really, in terms of finding out your sense of where we are today and the challenges that we'll hear about in the next few weeks. You're a candidate to be Prime Minister from tomorrow. A really big job. What's your just to take you back to the young Sajid? What's your first memory of being aware of public affairs and politics and the world out there, outside, that you're now hoping to lead?
Well, first of all, can I thank British Future for putting on this event and the Royal Society for hosting it. So turning straight away to your first question, my first sort of memory of politics and, well, you actually said, and the world and society around me, and I think I'd say something that's relevant, certainly for this audience, is one of my earliest memories, it's not so much politics, but it's certainly about the world around me, was when I lived in Rochdale. I was born in Rochdale, at a very young age, going to school, to my infant school. I remember going with my cousin, one of my cousins, and we would always try to avoid other sort of young people that were fans of the NF, National Front. And they used to have parts of Rochdale that have the NF signs graffitied all over the place, not all over the place, in some places, and we'd notice it. And we used to try to avoid it because we thought we might get picked on, beaten up and things. I was very young, I mean, I must have been about 5, 6. And I'd walk with her to school. And I remember just with my cousin just chatting, like, why do these people, not like us? Why do they behave like that? Why do they say all these things and use words like, packy and things like that? And it wasn't political in any way. I didn't even know what politics was. Someone mentioned the word then, but it was noticing the world around me and parts of society around me. You asked me about it, more political. I would say much later. I moved to Bristol by then, and my dad would, someone who worked incredibly hard during the day, and one of his things that he would not want to miss at the end of a busy day would be to watch the news. And then there's one TV in the house. Didn't matter what me or my brothers were watching. I could be in the middle of Knight Rider or something, and he'd come in just before 9 o'clock and switch to the news channel. My brothers sort of left the room, and I'd sort of thought, hang out and see what the news is about. And that's when I got into news, into current affairs, and politics in the UK then was very much dominated by Margaret Thatcher. Yeah. And so I remember a lot about her and her government. And that naturally led me to ask my dad questions about things that were going on, the Falklands War and things like that, the miners' strike, and I'd have a chat with my dad. But those were probably the earliest political memories.
You're an early adopter, and that your parents were ambitious, for themselves, but especially for you as children.
Yeah, I think that's why. I think, like most immigrant stories, I know that's why they left Pakistan. In that their family were sort of $1-a-day farmers. Their grandparents were and things. So that was the sort of life story there. They wanted something better for certainly for their children. So my dad came first. Went a few years later. Went back, married my mum, and then she joined him. But it was certainly about having more opportunities for their children, and that was growing up. That over time, you sort of I learned that, and I didn't want to disappoint them either. I wanted. There's always not pressure, but there's always a feeling that your parents have done a lot for you, and I didn't want them to feel that in some way I'm going to let them down, and that was a driving force as well, I think.
So far, they're okay. Where you got too far, but there are these parallel.
Well, they did want me to become a doctor and accountant.
So the politics, was this, so there are these sorts of parallel lives you could have led. You could have grown up in Pakistan.
I could have. If I was born in Pakistan, I'd probably be a $1-a-day farmer too. In the opportunities would have been very different. And it makes me, growing up, I've become more and more sort of acutely aware of all the opportunities that were offered to me, my brothers, my wider family here in the UK. But that doesn't mean life was easy, because we've all got opportunities, but it's not a level playing field. And it wasn't then. Yeah. It's got things, some ways have got a lot better, but it certainly wasn't when I was younger in terms of my own memory, in terms of we as a family, we didn't have much money. There was 7 of us, me, my mum and dad, and my 4 brothers living in a 2-bedroom flat. We didn't have lots of connections, and my school was okay, wasn't brilliant in any way. And so we had a lot of challenges, and it's one of the things that that motivates me now. And that as been said, I'm very privileged with the position I have in politics today. But if I was Prime Minister, one of my absolute priorities would be to learn from my own experience and see how that informs my vision for the future. And what I want to see is a society where it's more of a level playing field. There's more equality of opportunity, that people can feel that if they have a go, that they can succeed and get on.
And if we went to schools in Bristol today, it depends what school we go to. We might go to one school, a quarter of the children might be going off to university. Another one, it might be half or more of the children. Your school certainly wasn't large numbers of people going to university from the school.
No, not at that time. I mean, it suffered from low expectations. I think, sadly, probably in those days especially, it's probably maybe that was true of many schools, but as a school that it was, I often felt the teachers are just they weren't particularly inspiring at all. I don't remember a single inspiring teacher from that particular school. And in fact, far from it. And when I was approaching, I was 15, I think, and it's a time when you decide on what was then called O-levels. And I remember when I wanted to study maths at O-level, my school suddenly decided, because hardly any kids in my school did O-level maths, and they said, "No, you don't. We don't think you should do that. We think it's much better that you leave school at 16 and go and get a job."
So you'd be doing CSE maths, or you?
Yeah, that's what they recommended. That's what the school recommended, but I didn't take no for an answer. And because I thought I was good at maths, I was convinced I was good, and I knew at that point I wanted to go on and do A-levels, and maths was actually one of the A-levels I wanted to do, and so I thought, how on earth can I do that if I can't even be allowed to sit the O-level exam? So in that case, I went to my dad that evening and I told him what had happened, and he said, "Well, what do we have to do so you can study O-level maths?" I said, "Well, Dad, someone needs to teach me calculus," and my dad said, "Well, I can't help you with that." But I thought I'd find someone. So I looked in the local paper, the Bristol Evening Post, and found the cheapest tutor I could find, £6 an hour, something like that. And it was a gentleman studying a master's or something at Bristol Uni. And he gave me 3 or 4 lessons. In fact, what actually happened, my dad only had £50. He said, "I can give you £50 and that's what I can contribute towards your maths tuition." And I ran out of money, didn't quite finish the calculus, and then he offered the tutor. He said, "I will give you the extra 2 or 3 lessons you need for free," and that was the difference. And then I went on, did very well in my maths O-level, went on to do my A-level maths, got a grade A in my maths A-level and things. So it was, the school had it completely wrong.
So that's a turning point for you in a way. There's a parallel life where you.
I had to leave that school. I had to leave that school to do A-levels.
Yeah.
So they, not surprisingly, they said you can't do the O-levels that you want, and therefore, even if you want to do A-levels, you can only do these, and you can only do 2. Someone had told me that if you want to go to university, I didn't really know much about universities, but they said you should try to do 3 A-levels. So I went to my local technical college, and I did 3 A-levels there, just only because that's the only way I could get to do what I wanted.
So in your mobility story, in a way, education is absolutely what's there. So you get to university, you go to Exeter University. Now you have got the politics bug, haven't you? You're very much part of the Exeter University Conservatives. What was that like?
Yeah. Can I just say, if I may, on education, that if I look back, and whether it's for me, my brothers, and I think it is true of probably many immigrant families, certainly Asian families in my experience, is that many of the first generation, the parents really pushed education again and again and again as the value of education. And that was one thing I constantly grew up with, and being marched to the local library with my brothers and things at weekends, and I wasn't allowed to leave until I read a whole book. Right? My mum would just sit there watching over me and my brother, just watching, and it was quite off-putting, actually. And she couldn't read. My mum is one of the most intelligent people anyone would ever meet, but she didn't go to school. With girls at her age in Pakistan, in the villages, didn't go to school, so she couldn't even read. But she'd be sort of, "Are you?" And I could have fibbed and said, "Yeah, I'm reading this, Mum," just be flipping the page, whatever. But you felt the responsibility. So education is key, and that's why I've always been passionate about education. It's something I want to look at in the government, see what more we can do. But going back to your question about Exeter, that made by the time I got to Exeter, it was a big difference. I mean, first of all, one thing I noticed about Exeter at that time was I was a bit of an odd one out. Not just because there were hardly any ethnic minority kids at Exeter then. I mean, hardly any. I think it would be less than 2%. And I found one other, and he became my best friend. And then also at Exeter, it was full of people from private schools, and that made you a bit of a outsider. In that, I think at the time it was something like 5% of their student population was not from private school. Right, so from sort of state schools like me. So that said, I made lots of friends. I got on well, but it was a change for me, in that because that was what allowed me then to sort of apply for the jobs that I eventually got.
And when you graduate, and you have got very involved in student politics and gone to Conservative conferences and so on, but I think it's 1991 now. Yeah, Margaret Thatcher's gone, John Major's taken over. If you were thinking, should I become the Prime Minister of this country, and you looked over at Westminster, I mean, there's nobody like you in the Tory party in 1991. The Labour Party has started to do a bit of ethnic diversity for the first time ever in that period.
You're right, in the Conservative Party. In fact, that's when I joined the Conservative Party. When I first arrived at university, I went to my first Conservative Party conference in 1989. And then I went again the following year. But in 1989, as a student when I went, I do not remember seeing anyone else that was not white, not one person. I just don't remember seeing it. I'm not saying there wasn't at all. And I'm not just talking about, clearly there were no MPs, but I'm just about membership. And that said, I didn't walk around feeling odd. I just wasn't thinking about it. I just wasn't on my mind. And with my friends, and I'd enjoy it, make the most of it. But you're right, at that time, there were not, and probably for many years later, there were no ethnic minority sort of MPs. In fact, when I became a member of Parliament, or when I first thought about this was 2009, and I became a member in 2010. In 2009, there were only 2 at that time.
Yeah, I mean, so you're part of the change. I mean, David Cameron opens the party up, actually, and makes a big, and finally Britain has ethnic diversity in the Labour Party and in the Conservative Party. And that's, we take that for granted now, but that's less than 10 years ago.
Yes.
That happened.
Yeah.
And that was a big change, I think, for your party. But that was meant to, I think, make the Conservative Party much more confident in its outreach across an increasingly diverse society. And has that gone slower than you and David Cameron thought it would when you made that breakthrough in 2010?
Well, I can't speak for David Cameron, but I can say that it's at one level it certainly has been a success in diversifying the party, not just in terms of ethnicity, but also having more women MPs, where there's been some good results, and also people from different backgrounds as well. And so one level has gone well. But I do think there's more work to be done. I think with the Conservative Party, one thing, although with Labour, as you say, there are more ethnic minority MPs, it is notable. I think I'm right in saying, stand to be corrected, but I don't know a single Labour ethnic minority MP that isn't elected from a majority ethnic minority seat.
That they are more clustered in highly diverse seats, and you're all out in...
And that is a difference. That's a really big difference in the approach of the parties. And maybe it's because Labour thinks only ethnic minorities elect ethnic minorities. You know, they'd have to answer that question. But it is notable that you don't see that. Within the Conservatives, it's very different. But that said, I think across Parliament, all political parties, I think there's more work to be done. And I particularly like it in Parliament when you get lots of young children visiting Parliament in the sort of, especially on a Monday morning before Parliament officially opens, and you see many that might come from schools that have high levels of ethnic minority children. I often think what they think when they look at Parliament. And today, if they look across all the benches, they will see people that look like themselves. And I think that's so important that they feel that what they see is what they can become if they wanted to. And that certainly wasn't the case, even, as you say, even 10 years ago, especially when you go back 15, 20 years. And so our Parliament has improved, but there's more work to be done.
That was progress. I mean, what British Future has noticed, just in the, and other people have noticed as well, in the research we do on, you know, elections and demographics and so on, the biggest factor of people not voting Conservative is not being white. And so if you're from an ethnic minority background, you're half as likely to vote Conservative as other people, even if you're paying the top rate of tax or doing whatever else you're doing that Conservatives expect you to vote for you. So in a way it's change in Parliament, but actually you didn't crack that challenge in as well as you thought you might. And it looks like you might be going a bit backwards.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we have gone backwards in that regard. It's noticed, I think, and if you look at the last two elections, and which were quite close, 2015, 2017, that by 2015, as Conservatives, we had picked up of the overall sort of ethnic minority vote, it was a higher proportion compared to 2010. And I think that was a key factor in helping us to get a majority in that year. A small majority, but still a majority. 2 years later, we lost it. And one of the, again, key factors of losing it was going back in our share of the ethnic minority vote. And you know, you're absolutely right. And I think I actually, you know, looking ahead, the next election, whenever it comes, we need to do much better, you know, much more broader appeal, and that includes with votes from all communities.
And it's a bigger point, obviously, than ethnic diversity. There's a real sense of polarisation and division in our country right now. And so some people say, let's close that. But other people are now saying, pick a side. I mean, Donald Trump was here this week.
Was he?
As you know. And you didn't get his endorsement, which you must be quite gutted.
I wasn't looking for his endorsement.
But if we have this polarisation, could we be heading in the direction of having our own British Trump? Might be the way our politics goes.
There's only one Trump, but I know what you mean.
You haven't got the hair.
I knew you were going to mention my hair at some point. All right. There's a very serious point just there, which is about division in societies, and in fact, you know, you've talked about, you brought up the sort of US, but if we look across the world, democratic societies, there is a rise in division and people. Well, let's say that politicians exploiting division. There's a sort of let's call it a newer breed of politicians, left and right, you know, that have decided that one way that they think that you can try and get votes is to appeal to division, to exacerbate division, to get angry people to vote for you. That for me is the worst thing you could be doing in any society. It's the last thing I want to see, but it's happening. It's happening in Italy. It's happening in Austria. We can't go that way. Now, I think some of the causes of that in democratic societies are similar. It might be related to people trying to exploit sort of fears in some communities about rise in migration. I think actually the pace of change of technology has a lot to do with it, because we've seen such a rapid change in technology in such a short space of time that many people feel anxious about their jobs that they thought they had for life suddenly sort of disappearing before their eyes. And then some politicians are exploiting that. And now when we turn to the UK, in some ways I think the Brexit vote, the output, the result of the Brexit was a sort of expression of some of these frustrations in society about these underlying pressures. And there are politicians that are trying to exploit that. Now, my own view is, I think that's the way the Labour Party has gone. I think that under Jeremy Corbyn, we have someone who is into identity politics, absolutism, and wants to exploit division. And the other great political party in our country, the Conservative Party, is the only sort of party that's, if you look at the history books, that's capable of taking power in recent history. One's gone this way. I don't want the Conservatives to go that way. So I do think the sort of decision that we face as Conservatives now as in deciding our future is, what kind of party do we want to be? Do we want to be a party that appeals broadly to the whole country, that one nation party that tries to bring people together? Or do we also want to go down the road of division? And for me, it has to be the former.
But lots of your colleagues will be saying, if lots of people who like us think the Brexit Party is part of the answer, we'll have to look and sound like the Brexit Party.
Well, the Brexit Party is not the answer. It's anything but the answer. You don't beat the Brexit Party by becoming the Brexit Party. You've got to defeat the Brexit Party with what they're trying to exploit, which is anger in society. And the one way you do that, you have to deliver on Brexit. That's what I do want to see. But also I think we need to understand more why so many people voted that way. And it wasn't all about the EU. I think there were a lot of underlying frustrations about people feeling maybe not enough high-paid jobs. Maybe they feel that the South East benefits too much from infrastructure investment and the economy needs to be rebalanced. Maybe it's people want more investment in skills and things. Maybe they feel their politicians are out of touch. You only deliver on Brexit properly, not just by leaving the EU, but also by, I think, addressing some of those underlying frustrations.
And one of those frustrations was the lack of confidence in what government's been doing on immigration. That clearly was part of the referendum that we had. I mean, immigration's been good for you and your family. You think it's been good for Britain?
I think it's been fantastic for Britain. I think we would be a much poorer society today. I don't just mean economically, but I include that. I think culturally, in every way, if we didn't have the approach to immigration we've had broadly under sort of successive governments over the last sort of few decades, where we've welcomed people, whether they are from the Commonwealth or elsewhere, or more recently, European citizens, and it's made us stronger. And that is something I don't, whilst I understand people's concerns about what they might think of as excessive immigration, I think what people want more than anything is control over immigration, and we can deliver that. Now that we're leaving the EU, we can have more control. But I don't think it's about being obsessed with the overall numbers, as long as numbers that it's controlled by your own government about what it feels it needs.
Yeah, I mean, British Future's next publication is called Immigration After May, because, she hasn't just been the Prime Minister, she's the longest-serving Home Secretary. It was difficult when you've got a job that your boss has done for a very long time. But, we noticed that, the net migration target, that was 37 missed quarters in a row.
Yeah.
So do you feel after tomorrow there's probably a consensus around the Cabinet table for maybe it's time to do something else?
I'm not going to speak for the whole cabinet, but I've already said recently I would not have the target. I just think it's nonsense to set a target that you can never meet, right? Tens of thousands, and also it should be led by what you think the country needs, and that changes over time as well. At a time of very low unemployment, today we have unemployment at I think 45-year low. There are businesses that, if they don't get the skills that they need, it won't be immigrants taking jobs. They don't take the jobs. Immigrants help to create jobs for everyone else. And so, it is something that we can just take a much more, I think, a flexible, sensible attitude to. And it's not just about people working, your students. I want to see more international students come to our country. I want to make it, if they're coming here studying at our great universities, and if they want to work afterwards, we should make it easier for them to stay and work, and not say you've got to go back home just for the sake of it. So we need a more positive attitude to this, and I think the country would welcome it. So
what put you in charge of this area, of course, was the Windrush scandal. What did we learn from the Windrush scandal?
We are still learning. I think there's still things to learn. And I think one of the first things is that you've had a community, in this case the sort of Commonwealth Caribbean community, many of its members very badly treated, completely wrongly treated, over successive years under successive governments. Not, from what I've learned, not because any government sat there and say, let's pick on some group of people, not at all, but just poor policy making over many years that then led to this problem it was unacceptable what happened. And I've met many people from that generation that and collectively have done so much for this country that were very, very badly treated. Some, put in some cases, not just denied benefits or not be able to get a job, but in some cases even kept in a detention centre. In some cases removed from the country. So I think we need to properly learn the lessons so that kind of thing can't happen again, that's for sure. And that work's still being done, and it can only properly be done if you've got someone independent coming in and looking at it and not just government deciding itself. And secondly, where you have had these wrongs, we as a government, you need to do everything you can to try and make amends. And some amends, you can't properly do it. But you can pay compensation, you can help with documentation, citizenship, and all of that. And we are doing all that. But the thing we have to learn, long after I'm gone from the Home Office, is that this kind of thing cannot happen again.
And it also gave people a bit of a wake-up, really, because I suppose we got into the mood in politics and the media where the thing to do on immigration was be as tough as possible. And yet if you're unfair, you're without compassion, you're too tough, you can get very much on the wrong side of the whole public as a result. So, in our research, attitudes have been warming up on immigration, possibly as a sense of control. With the Alan Kurdi incident, there was a sense of compassion, and so governments had to respond to the compassion of the public. And so we did refugee resettlement. How do you feel refugee resettlement has gone?
Well, I'm very proud as a country. We resettle more refugees in our national refugee programme than any other European country last year. We did more than any other country. And we're part of a number of programs, mostly through UNHCR. And we go to a long distance to find those refugees that are most in need, often in the camps in Syria and Turkey, for example, even Greece. And we have them come to the UK and give them new lives and help them settle and have new lives. In fact, and we go further. And one thing, if I can share something that's not that well known, I'll give you an example. I can talk about it now, but not at the time. I think it was November, I was told that there were about 100, just under 100, what are called Syrian white helmets. These were civilians in Syria that were a bit like this like a Syrian sort of Red Cross helping other civilians that were being injured in the conflict. And because Assad, with the help of the Russians, was closing in on them, they're very worried, and Assad was trying to murder as many of them as he could. And they were all sort of being pushed to one part in sort of south of Syria, close to the Israeli border. And I was told that within days, that if they are not rescued and airlifted, brought out of there, that they and their families in the villages, they will be dead, because that's what Assad was doing. And we, working with an ally, and I can mention who it is now, is Canadians. The Canadians and the UK, we got together and we had a joint rescue operation with the help of the Israelis, and we got them out there with their families, and we resettled over 100, many families here in the UK. And we didn't want to talk about it at the time, it was very sensitive, and I went to see some of these families that were settled in the West Midlands. And for me, it was the most moving experience I've had as Home Secretary when one of them, I'm in a group, and she didn't speak English, it's through an interpreter. And she said, and she looked at me, she said, if you hadn't made the decision that you made, because we didn't have to do that, we thought about doing this when I heard about it. She said, I would be dead right now if you hadn't done this. And that should make us all proud about this country and what we do to help those that are most in need around the world.
And the broader story of the resettlement programme is the pledge was 20,000 over 4 years or so on. And then I think this autumn we'll have done what we pledged, because 200 local councils, 200, lots of
Yeah.
people have done their bit, and then that adds up to 20,000 lives changed, protected.
Actually, it's been more than 20,000.
Yeah, but there's a decision now quite soon, this summer, I think. We should carry on with that. Are you pushing to carry on with that?
Carry on, yes. Yeah. We should carry on with the national resettlement programs. It's one of the best ways that we can help and do our bit, and I think it fits well with the work we do in terms of international aid. We have given more in bilateral aid to those suffering from the Syrian conflict than any other country in the world. We have a generous aid program, and if I was Prime Minister, I would keep that. I would keep our commitment to 0.7. I wouldn't change it, and I would keep the same definition around it. I wouldn't play around with that. I think it's one of the best things that we are doing to help some of the most vulnerable and needy around the world. And when UNHCR say to us, you've taken the 20,000 you said, we'll say, well, it's working, Britain's proud of it. We will keep working with them, absolutely. They're a good partner.
Excellent. So let's talk as well, immigration and integration are so closely connected. You're an example of Britain getting integration right. People call you a role model and all the rest of it. Are we good at integration in Britain?
We're better than most countries, I think, in Europe, but we still got a lot of work to do. So, first, I do think, and remember, before Home Secretary, I was a community secretary, and I looked a lot at integration. In fact, I commissioned the first report that we had independently done on integration, and then I published the integration white paper, which set out a lot of new initiatives. But one thing I learned through that is that we're good in some ways, in that compared to most other countries in Europe with large sort of minority populations, France, Germany, and others, we've done very well. In that, if you look in terms of level of integration in different walks of life, I'll give you an example that when I first started going to European Council meetings, so when I was the first as a Treasury Minister, I went to what were the ECOFIN meetings, and then in every government job I've had, I've gone to the equivalent sort of meetings. I've yet to go to a single European Council meeting, and this is when you have all the other 27 states, you're all around the table with all your little flags and stuff, and see another non-white face of any of the ministers of any of the other countries, ever. I've never seen it. It doesn't matter what it is. Now's Home Secretary is exactly the same. Right? And that is just a snapshot to me, just how little integration you see in so many European countries. So we have got something to celebrate. The reason I said we need to go further is what I found with that report is that there's still too many pockets of separation in society, in either how people live or, for example, the fact that we found there were about 800,000 people, we estimate, that live in Britain. Britain is their home, and they speak little or virtually no English. That is, and these are people that, some of them have lived here 30, 40, 50 years. And they don't speak English. And so what I want to see is, I don't want us to live in these silos. I understand there's sort of, in society, there's layers of belonging, and one of those layers of belonging is, for example, speaking the language. Get on with everyone else.
But how does the Prime Minister change that?
So the first thing you change on, I mean, for me, if there's one thing I could do to have better integration, it would be to focus on English language. And so what I would do, I'd put rockets under that program. In fact, I would change the whole program and make it as easy as possible to, first of all, reach out to people that Britain is their home, and help them to learn English. And so it is about helping them. You can't force anyone, of course, but helping them. I'd use mentors from their own community. I'd use new ways of training. I think it's money so well spent, not just economically, because maybe, for example, it won't surprise people that most of people in that category that can't speak English, they're women, and most of them are Asian, Pakistani and Bangladeshi women. And how can they get a job if they want to, if they can't even speak the language? So it can economically empower them, but also it means it's better for society. You can go down the street and talk to people, talk to your fellow citizens. I think language is one of the best ways that we can help people get on.
And that's, I mean, so your experience is people do want to learn and sometimes can't get the access they need.
Yeah, no, I understand. I know the power of it too. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I used to go with my mum to the doctor's surgery, not because there was something wrong with me, but because she had an ailment, I had to interpret.
Yeah.
Right? I was the interpreter. But now my mum speaks English, and it has transformed her life. But she didn't then. So I can see how your life changes just by able to speak the language, and we need to give that power to more people.
So that's your priority for integration. I mean, it feels, if you're, from your generation, my generation, it feels that we've come a long way on race and identity in some ways from the sort of playgrounds or the football terraces of 30 or 40 years ago. But you think about the mood of the country right now, and, actually younger people might think there's a lot out there: hate crime, racism, xenophobia. In a way, are we disappointed that we didn't make much faster progress than we expected?
I think there's, as I said, I think there's things to celebrate about society, and shared some of the reasons why I think that's the case. But I think there is also room for disappointment, especially in recent years, in that we have seen a rise in hate crime. We've seen in all categories of racial hate crime, whether it's anti-Muslim hate crime, anti-Semitism, rise in hate crime against traveller communities and things. We have seen that. There's no one reason for it, but we have, and it is something I've noticed, especially when I was community secretary, but also now as Home Secretary, is have a responsibility to try and fight it, and that does worry me. And I think if you're thinking why, there's no one reason, but I think it is part to do with the growing sort of division society and some people that try to exploit differences. I think that is having an impact, and that's why I come back to that we just can't have a society where our main political parties sort of think that the way to win votes is to exploit division. And
you're also a parent, and for your sort of children's generation, their cohort and so on, it's a very different experience, is it, from the NF in Rochdale when you were 7, or is it? It's
completely different. I think for my own children, it's completely different in that, obviously, that's great, and but. My own children, I've got 4 children. They're mixed race children, and I think in terms of their own experiences, in terms of race and things, it's like night and day compared to my own experience.
My parents are Indian and Irish, and they were early adopters of the mixed race relationships. It wasn't the most popular thing in the world, but everyone got used to it. Yeah. Eventually, was that were you? I mean, in a way, you were slightly ahead of the curve. Now that there were mixed race royals now, but this probably weren't quite in those days. How was that?
Yeah. Well, for me, when I met my wife Laura, by then I think you'd started noticing more mixed race couples, and it was. I wouldn't say I experienced problems or issues with that, but you did sort of notice in sometimes when you travel together, maybe certainly abroad, so that people will sort of take a second look. And but it's nothing in today's society. I think thankfully it doesn't really matter in any way that it did before. And I think this is also one of the ways that as a country, I think we are much further ahead from so many other countries. I think we are just one of the most successful multiracial countries in the world.
So there is change there to work with, and we celebrate it some of the time. England are playing tonight. There's football, there's cricket, there's all sorts of things on. The sort of Sajid Javid Premiership. Would you rather win the Cricket World Cup or the Football World Cup?
I'm more of a cricket fan.
You are, yeah.
Always have been.
Yeah, and so but you
can ask me about the Tebbit test.
But you must remember it. You're a student. What did you feel? What did you feel about it at the time?
I didn't think much about it at the time. But I actually, even at that time, if anyone had asked me, I would have. For me, it would have been quite straightforward. About I've always felt English. Yeah. I'm very proud of my Pakistani roots, but it wouldn't have been.
I mean, I was England as well. I just had to quieten down a bit once he said it.
Yeah.
Made it a bit harder. So, but I mean, a lot of British Asians actually have always felt more British than English because of the history of empire, Commonwealth.
Yeah, you can understand that. Yeah,
first generation very much felt that.
Yeah.
Has that changed? Are you more British than English?
If I'm abroad and people didn't know who I am, where you're from, I'll probably normally just say England or UK or something like that. I don't think about it too much. I'm proud to be English. I'm proud to be British as well. I think our union is it's very important. It's certainly very important to me. I mean, both politically and culturally and socially. But you're right about sort of second and third generation migrants. It is different in terms of how they might express themselves. But I think it's also healthy what we're seeing now in terms of that patriotism amongst people of second, third generation migrants. I think it's growing in some ways.
Great. Well, I better give some other people a chance to sort of put you on the spot. Let's see some questions. So I've got one in the second row there. There's a microphone coming round. People say who they are. That would be great. And I'll take one in the second row and then two just in front of you. Sorry, the third row I meant. Sorry, I was just not counting properly.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Benita Mehta-Palmer. I'm Director of Modern Britain. Sajid, I'm really pleased to hear you say that you deem the net migration target nonsense and you want a flexible and sensible approach to immigration. Really welcome your words on that. Do you think with you as Prime Minister we could get to a stage where we talk about immigration rates in the same manner as tax rates?
Let's take two or three at a time. Let's come forward. Yeah, take two.
If you say you do...
Just say who you are as well.
Oh, sorry, Claire Ellicott from the Daily Mail. If you do become Prime Minister and you fail to secure a deal with EU by October and Parliament moves to block a no-deal Brexit, what's your plan? What will you do?
And one next year is going to be big questions.
Alex Morales from Bloomberg News. You talked a lot about the politics of division and how the country faces a choice between the politics of division and one nation. I was wondering if you think that's a choice your party faces at the moment as well in its current leadership election. And if I could just ask on a no-deal Brexit, would you, like Michael Gove, if a deal was in sight come October the 31st but not yet finalised, would you extend Article 50 again?
So if I start with the first question, if I may, you finished by saying, would you treat immigration rates like tax rates? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by immigration rate, but I do know with tax rates, I want to cut tax rates. So with immigration rate, if you talk about the level of immigration, the level in terms of net migration, and as I say, I just think that just a more sensible approach is looking at it in terms of the need of the country, and I feel, and I certainly have felt this even before I was Home Secretary, is that what people want to see, or what they want to know, is that their government, through the people, the government that's elected, has the ability to control net migration by pulling certain levers, and I think that's what's most important. I've also seen, when it comes to the debate on immigration, when you talk about not so much immigrants or net migration, but when you turn it into something like nurses or social care workers or engineers that happen to come from abroad but work in those sectors, people are much more accepting. One of the first decisions I made as Home Secretary was that we have a cap on non-EU migrants, what's called a Tier 2 cap, migrant workers. And the cap was being hit every month. It's a monthly cap. And that's because the NHS needed a lot more doctors and nurses, and we were just telling them to go away. And it was just a nonsense. And so I managed to take doctors and nurses out of the cap. But I remember when we announced that, there were some people in government, I won't say who, but there were some people in government saying, you can't do that, the public are going to go crazy, they're going to say you're weakening on migration and all that. And when I did it, we actually had the opposite reaction. We said, oh, thank God they're being sensible about doctors and nurses.
Should have shared our research with them.
Sorry?
Should have shared our research with them. There's no popular migration you'll find anyway.
Well, you're right. So I think sometimes changing the language makes all the difference. The question about a no-deal Brexit, about what was it? It's about if
Parliament moves to block a no-deal Brexit, what would you do then?
Will you abolish Parliament?
No, I wouldn't prorogue Parliament at all. I just think that's a complete nonsense. I mean, so first of all, let me be clear. My policy would be to do everything I can to leave the European Union on October 31st. And if it got to a point where I had to choose between no deal, no Brexit, I would pick no deal as the leader of the country. But whatever I do, obviously Parliament's going to want to have its say on it, and Parliament should have its say. the idea that anyone would think they can block Parliament. I mean, our Parliament is sovereign. It's one of the things that makes us a great nation. And people that they talk about why we need to implement the result of the referendum, and they're right, because it's democracy, and that's why I want to implement it. But it's also democracy that you allow your Parliament to do its job. So I just think I'm not into this proroguing Parliament rubbish and things. I think it's just a complete nonsense and anti-democratic and anti-British. The question from the gentleman, which can you just remind me? It was about on the deal.
It was about the politics of division. Do you think that's a
yeah? And your second question
was on no deal. If come October 31st, a deal was in sight, but not quite yet finalised. Would you?
No, I don't think he's allowed two questions.
Yeah, you did ask the first one.
Yeah, I've answered.
You've done no deal. Yeah.
On the politics of division, I think we're at a crossroads as a country. Yeah, I think that as I said, one of our parties, the Labour Party, is all about division, about appealing to angry people, and I don't want my party.
But is your party's at that crossroads?
Yes, my party's at that crossroads, and if we, depending on how this decision goes, there are candidates that I believe that the way that they would then try to win a future general election is by exploiting division, and that's something I utterly reject.
Let's take some more. I've got one, 3 or 4 seats back, and then I'll go further back in the room. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick Outley, BBC. Another Brexit one. Can you categorically say, like some of your leadership rivals have, that the UK will leave the EU on the 31st of October, deal or no deal? And for what you've just said, if Parliament said to you, we don't want to leave without a no deal, would you accept that instruction?
And let's take, there's a woman sort of 3 or 4 rows back. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Stephanie. I'm the London correspondent for the German paper Die Welt. You wrote, I think, in the Daily Mail that, in fact, there are technological solutions to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland. The European Commission and also the European Council says that this is not true, and therefore you need a backstop, and the backstop cannot be time limited. So at the end of the day, is it a political project by the European Union to insist on the backstop?
And there's a gentleman in a grey jacket with a badge.
Avnish Goel, I'm chair of Care England, which is the largest trade association for care operators in the UK. Sajid, thank you for that. Social care is in a mess, and the white paper keeps getting kicked into long grass. Successive governments just don't want to deal with social care. It's a real mess. What's your stance on the white paper and sorting out social care so it has equal standing with the NHS?
Okay. The first question from the gentleman on the timing on October 31st. That I'm clear that we need to leave on October 31st. We cannot keep delaying this. And I think that's clear from some of the recent sort of election results that we've seen. The referendum now was 3 years ago, and I think people rightly expected for us to have delivered on that and left the EU by now, and we can't keep having a delay. I also don't want to see a second referendum, and therefore I'm clear that all the policies that I would have if I were Prime Minister will all be based on leaving by October 31st. Now, I want to do that by a deal. That would be my absolute preference, and that's what I work incredibly hard on. I would still keep working on no deal, not because I want it, I just think it's the responsible thing to do. But if we get to October the 31st, as I was saying a moment ago, and we have to choose between no deal and no Brexit, I would choose no deal. If Parliament try to block it, and let's wait and see what Parliament does, but I do accept Parliament is divided. I don't want to see a general election before we deliver Brexit, so it's this Parliament, it's this Speaker, and I accept that. I would respond to Parliament as you would expect a responsible Prime Minister to do. If Parliament is similar to the question about proroguing, I wouldn't get involved. That's Parliament's business in terms of what it wants to debate. I don't think I should try to frustrate Parliament in that way. But I'm clear that I would do everything in my power to leave on October the 31st. The question from the lady about the alternative arrangements. First of all, in in my department, I've got Border Force. Border Force are the specialists on borders, not just in Britain, but they advise around the world. And we are very clear with the work that's been done in my department that you can have, absolutely, you can have an open border on the island of Ireland with no infrastructure on the border, using existing technology that would represent these alternative arrangements, something alternative to the backstop. And it can be done in a couple of years. What is required to get it done, as I think everyone would understand, is you need both sides, the British and the Irish, to work together as a team to try and make that happen. So first of all, I'm clear it can happen. The thing, though, is that you've got to then do something different to get that goodwill. What I would do as a sort of offer, new offer to the Irish, is agree to pay entirely for all the costs of those alternative arrangements. Both the setup costs, the fixed costs, and also the running costs. I think it's the right thing for us to do economically if it unlocks an orderly deal. I think it's the right thing to do morally because we voted to leave, we're changing the status quo, and it's right that we offer to pay for the costs of that because we're both committed to the Good Friday Agreement. And the other thing I just add to that, why I think it's possible, because even the EU itself, I heard what you've said about the EU and the Commission, others say, but they have said themselves that Article 50, which is the article that will be used to implement the backstop, is not something that can be used for a permanent solution. So even the EU agrees legally they cannot keep the backstop in place as a permanent arrangement. They accept that. They've accepted that all along. So if they accept that, then they, by definition, have accepted at some point it's got to have to end. The longer it persists, the more susceptible it is to legal challenge in the European courts itself. So I think it's in everyone's interest then to try to come together in agreement on this. And I think if you are pursuing something very specific, which is what I want, which is a time limit on the backstop or a proper sort of exit clause, I think that can be done. And the gentleman about the social care.
Fix the Northern Irish border.
What would I? Yeah. Now, social care. It is something I've actually looked at quite a bit in my old role when I was the community secretary because of the role that local government has in delivering social care. And I agree with something that you just said about its importance, and I think it is on par with NHS in terms of importance to the public, having a proper social care system. And I agree lots of changes do need to be made when you just look at the demographics and how they're moving. And actually, I'm not just thinking about elderly social care. There's a growing cost for working age adult social care as well. And we need to make sure that we are looking after all those people as well. And I've come to the conclusion that the only way you're going to properly solve this in our politics is that you need to find a consensus on this. Otherwise, what you will find, as we saw a bit at the last election, even when one party comes with an idea, it will get attacked and vice versa. Both parties have been playing that game for a while, and that's not the way. Just as we, as major political parties have reached a sort of a broad consensus on the NHS, I think we need that on social care. And so what I would do, and I don't say this lightly because I wouldn't think of this for most of the challenges we face, I think we need a royal commission that properly looks at this independently, puts proposals to politicians. I know it will take time, but then I hope that all politicians can just be a bit sensible about it and then look at those proposals, adopt a version of them, and then have a consensus around them so we don't keep having this political football with social care because it's not fair to the people.
Thanks. So there's a woman in a black jumper there.
Hi, I'm Ritika from Eastern Eye. You've said previously that either you're not too brown or brown enough for some people. I want to ask, what traits mark you out as being typically Asian?
And let's come forward a couple.
Alison Mackenzie, ITV Central, your constituency area. You talk about bringing the country together. I'd like to know your view on HS2.
And a woman just behind where you are now. Thank you.
So obviously what you said about young people coming into Parliament and seeing a lot kind of more diverse kind of backgrounds and things like that. But for me, it's great that they're seeing these faces, but how representative are those faces of the young people? So do you think that if you were to take up kind of the Prime Minister role, do you think that you would put political education on that agenda to kind of go into these state schools where they are very diverse in order to train up kind of the next level and the future?
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, the question about what might mark you out as being typically Asian. Well, first of all, actually, let me say that just because someone is brown or black or whatever, there shouldn't be anything typical about it. There should be no expectation of someone just by looking at their skin color and thinking, well, they must be good or bad at something just because of their skin color. Now, I know that's not what you meant, but sadly there are people in society that do think like that, and it's wrong. I think it's just wrong at every level. If you're a multiracial society, we're all part of that same society, and people have the right to be what they want and express it the way they want, no matter what their racial background. Now, but that said, you haven't seen my Bhangra dancing, have you? And so, let's leave it there.
We're web streaming live.
After you.
We'd like to share.
The next question was about HS2. I support HS2. I fully support it. I want to make sure that we don't spend a penny more on it than we need to. But it is one of those things, and there are many others we need to do, that is critical to rebalancing our economy. And I mentioned earlier when Sunder was asking me about Brexit, and we're talking a bit about the causes of that decision. And I think part of it is a frustration around the country that there's too much focus on the southeastern London, and whether it's in the West Midlands, whether it's the north, we do need to rebalance our economy, and we do need to improve our poor overall productivity in the country. And one of those ways is by having world-class infrastructure. I think we need to go further. I think that the other day I saw the proposals for Northern Powerhouse Rail, and I think those are very exciting. We need to be looking at that. And one of the things I would do is put a lot more in infrastructure, because I think when you've got record low interest rates, where today the government can borrow 30-year money at 1.4%, if you can't find profitable projects for the government with that, then you need your head examined. And then there's some really big projects we can do, and I'd throw fibre optic into that. I'd throw the major investments in roads and getting rid of all those potholes around the country. So I think there's a lot we can do in terms of infrastructure. The question from the lady towards the back about younger people, I think this is one of the biggest issues of the day. How do we get more young people engaged in politics? Now, I think you've come up with a perfectly good idea, suggestion, and that's, if I've understood you correctly, it's about in schools, whether it's through the curriculum or otherwise, and whether that's through actual sort of formal teaching, or maybe indirect ways, maybe getting more people to go and speak to young children as well in schools about current affairs issues and things like that, and get them interested. And I try to do that whenever I can, and through a program called Speakers for Schools. I try to do that. But also, I think there's something else we need to do as politicians, and it's incumbent on the parties, which is try to communicate in a way with young people on the sort of the way that they consume news and ideas, and a lot of that is social media, for example. I still don't think we're good enough at it, and trying to understand when there's an election, how young people are getting their news, how they're making the decisions, and trying to be in the sort of same space and the same platforms as them.
Your party's got a massive problem with, almost everybody under 40. Looking at the last election,
we've got a real issue with not having enough support from younger people. And there was a report on this recently by a think tank, Onward, which is an excellent analysis of. I think they said, if I remember correctly, that the average age that someone votes Conservative or turns to vote Conservative was something like 59. So it is it's a serious issue, and it goes back to the point you said earlier about to win. Again, to win a majority, we talked earlier about votes from ethnic minority communities. You can also add younger people in that we're going backwards, and we need to find more ways to appeal. One is communication, but you also got to have the policies, the ideas. I was housing secretary before, And that is, for example, for me, one of the biggest issues facing young people in our country today. The fact that so many of them, by young I'm saying that under the age of 40, that feel that they can't buy a just decent home. If they work hard, play by the rules, they can't afford a home. And that wasn't the case in previous generations. And I think that is an example of the kind of area we need to be much more bold in terms of policy making.
Thanks. Let's take one right at the back. And we'll go behind there as well.
Home Secretary, you mentioned Englishness and...
Tell us who you are as well, please.
Sorry, James from the Centre for Policy Studies. You mentioned Englishness and Britishness earlier and the importance of the union. Do you think that there's a risk that this leadership contest could exacerbate English and Scottish nationalisms?
And behind as well.
Thank you. Ben Kentish from The Independent. Mr. Javid, you talked about the politics of division and the choice facing the Conservatives. I wondered how it makes you feel when you see some of your colleagues describing Muslim women wearing the niqab as looking like letterboxes or bank robbers. And more broadly on that, how much you fear that the sort of broader nationalism at the moment could be a threat to the Union. And if I may, on Brexit, you suggested that a technological solution to the Irish border issue could be 2 years off, although a Home Office leaked report suggested that it would be at least 10 years. So I wondered what evidence you'd seen to suggest it would be shorter than that.
That was two questions. We're not having the border again. We've had a lot about the border. A question in the middle there, Corey.
Hi, thank you, Sajid. I'm Kari Yassim, Chair of Muslim Imams National Advisory Board. You talked about integration, and I think we as a country are more integrated than many of European countries, and also I agree that English is an important issue. But perhaps I think we at British Future are also talking about equal opportunities and equal citizenship rather than integration, because we're seeing some of the division that's taking place in pockets of Britain is the other way around as well. So that the perhaps indigenous young white people are finding themselves that they can't integrate with ethnic minorities. So what can be done around that more than just the English, focus on English?
So Kara, which communities integrating?
So we're seeing the pockets of society where perhaps young white British men are finding themselves that they cannot integrate in their own local neighbourhoods because of the existence of ethnic minorities.
So the social
distance between
groups.
Yeah. So just for the gentleman from CBS, the first question was about, you wanted to know about the sort of Britishness and
the union. We'll do English and Scottish nationalism.
The union.
English and Scottish nationalism.
In this leadership election. There is a bit of risk of that in the debate, I think, because it's really, going back to my point earlier, that if your pitch is the way forward for the Conservatives is to sort of be more like the Brexit Party, then what is the Brexit Party? To me, it's quite a sort of narrow sort of English nationalist party. It is not really, from everything I saw or heard about the Brexit Party, it's not talking about the importance of our union of nations and things. And to me, that is very precious. It helps us make what we are. And it is important that then in this leadership election, that when we are talking about the future and bringing people together, it includes every part of our nation. And there are, of course, sort of some differences, notwithstanding that these powers are devolved in certain areas and things. So even a British Prime Minister, there's certain things that can only be done by the Scottish government. But yet there are lots of things that are important to the whole country that bring us together, and those that is vital if we're going to keep our union strong. So I think it is a very important issue in this debate. The question from the gentleman behind you, his main question around comments. People call British Muslim women, I think you said letterboxes and comments of that type. I think they're wrong. I don't think those are the right comments at all. I don't think any serious politician should use language like that. And I think they're wrong. The question from Kari Yassim this idea it's a two-way street, I think, is right. In that it's not that the pressure. It's not just about people from migrant communities integrating. It is also people, to use your example, from say it's white working class families to think about what their role is as well, how they can help. And I'll give you a quick example. When I was community secretary, I went back to Rochdale and I went to visit a school, a primary school that I went to speak at, and it was the pupils there. There were 95% from Asian background, Asian kids. There was another school down the road, another primary school that was less than a mile away, and same sort of neighbourhood therefore, and it's 95% white kids. This is self-segregation, and it's not good for both those groups of kids growing up, because they live virtually in the same area, but they're both growing up today in Britain in almost completely different communities in effect. And when they grow up, they're all British, they've all got something big to offer the country, and it's much better that at that age that more is done to bring them together.
One thing we've suggested, I mean, you could have long-term programmes about residential patterns, schools selection and so on. We could ask every governing body to have a conversation, mandate a conversation about what are your school links, how do you make sure every child in Britain has meaningful contact across ethnic groups, across class groups and so on. Is that the sort of thing you do?
I think there is a lot more can be done. I think that's one suggestion. We actually now have set up, and I set it up when I was community secretary, and now, but still part of it with the current community secretary. We have an intergovernmental group on integration, and we are looking at what more can be done to try and deal with this sort of schools issue and similar issues about this sort of what I call self-segregation, and looking what incentives and working with local authorities, what more can be done.
And in a way, integration, we've talked about it sort of through minorities, migrants and so on for a long time, and that's important, but it's only part of the picture. If we're not talking about everybody, it's not really integration, is it? Where do we look for our shared identity, for the things we share? What are the things you would use to actually practically bring the country together?
Well, one I've already mentioned. I think language is critical. But there are, and you've done work on this, is that there are, when you ask people, there are institutions and things that everyone thinks is very British. It doesn't matter what your background, whether you're a recent migrant, whether you're third, fourth generation, it doesn't matter. In the things like the NHS, the monarchy, probably even the BBC. There are things that everyone agrees is something that defines their Britishness. And I think it's worth sometimes thinking about how we can use that. I'll give you an example. When I was culture secretary, I really began to appreciate much more our soft power, as a country. We often talk about our hard power, but the soft power. When I would travel abroad, especially, and you'd see football teams from England, or you'd see the World Service, you'd hear the World Service. And it's something that makes, when British people are abroad, it makes them quite proud as well, that they're providing this service, or this is connected to their home. And I think we can make more of that as well.
And we saw some of this with D-Day, in a way, and that's, there's a shared history there, as we've been looking at, that perhaps people aren't as aware of how far back it goes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was very privileged to be at the D-Day commemoration, D-Day 75 commemorations yesterday in Portsmouth. And I was really lucky to meet some of the veterans there, and these are people actually. So 75 years ago, they were fighting beside British Indians, for example, Caribbean soldiers, British soldiers, and they were their comrades in arms. And I think people forget the contribution that's been made to this country by people from all over the Commonwealth, for example, that have ensured that we've got the freedoms that we have here today. And I think we can make more of that too.
Great. Well, we're out of time there on the conversation. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Please do stay for a drink afterwards. But it's been very helpful. These challenges will go on. There are big debates to come tomorrow and in the weeks ahead. It's really been great, Sajid, that you've taken the time to have this debate and conversation tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done.
Yeah, sure.
Just come down a step forward.